A massive tsunami rushes straight toward the city of Atlantis. People panic and run in all directions, desperately searching for shelter before the waves hit. Amid the chaos, the Queen of Atlantis sees her frightened daughter Kida and hugs her protectively. Just as they try to decide what to do, a magical blue light appears in the sky above the Queen and suddenly envelops her, lifting her into the air. Kida is left behind, but her grandfather comforts her and asks her to close her eyes. At that moment, the light forms a shield over the city, protecting it as it sinks intact into the sea. The story jumps to 1914 in Washington, D.C., where Milo, a young expert in maps and ancient languages, presents his theory about Atlantis. He claims it was an advanced civilization with superior technology and shows images and objects as evidence. His goal is to find Atlantis using the Shepherd's Journal, a key book that reveals its location. Milo has discovered a translation error. Atlantis isn't near Ireland, but in the cold waters of Iceland. However, it's soon revealed that he's not speaking to a real audience, but to statues in a boiler room beneath a museum where he works. He treasures a photo of himself with his grandfather, who raised him after his parents died. Suddenly, the clock chimes and Milo realizes he must rush to present his proposal to the museum's board of directors led by Mr. Harcourt. But before he can leave, he receives a letter rejecting his request. Frustrated, Milo heads to the museum and confronts the board, who try to avoid him. Desperate, he chases after Harcourt, begging for support for his expedition, but Harcourt shuts him down, explaining that the museum funds expeditions based on facts, not legends. Milo insists, threatening to quit, but Harcourt warns him not to waste his potential like his grandfather. That night in the rain, Milo returns home and finds a mysterious woman waiting in his living room. She introduces herself as Helga and says her boss has an interesting proposal for him. Helga takes him to meet Mr. Whitmore, who says he knew Milo's grandfather, the greatest explorer he ever met. He gives Milo a special gift from him, the original Shepherd's Journal, the key to finding Atlantis. He also tells him that his grandfather was a good man, but the museum directors tarnished his name and reputation. However, Mr. Whitmore has a plan. He asks Milo to prepare for a grand expedition to find Atlantis and tells him he's already assembled the best experts for the mission. To inspire him, he reminds Milo of something his grandfather once said: "Our lives are remembered by what we leave behind for those who come after us." He tells him the journal is his legacy and Atlantis is waiting. Milo, excited, accepts, and the next day, he prepares to board a submarine. Before departure, Mr. Whitmore introduces him to Commander Rourke, the team's leader. In his quarters, Milo meets Molière, the excavation expert, and Dr. Sweet. Then Milo reports to Commander Rourke, who introduces him to the rest of the crew, though they don't seem too thrilled about him. Still, Milo explains his theory about Atlantis, showing an illustration of the Leviathan, an enormous lobster-like creature that guards the city's entrance. He also points out a path that looks like a drainage pipe, but the crew finds his explanation strange and doesn't believe him. Suddenly, they spot something at the bottom of the ocean. When they light it up, they discover wreckage from ships of various eras scattered across the seafloor. Excited, they continue their underwater journey. Soon after, Packard, an elderly crew member, hears a strange noise and reports it to Rourke. Curious, Rourke orders the volume increased on the speakers, and when they look outside, they see something astonishing: a giant robotic lobster, the Leviathan, just as Milo described. The creature attacks the submarine, throwing the crew into chaos. Rourke orders an immediate evacuation in emergency subpods, but the Leviathan relentlessly chases them. Miraculously, they manage to escape and surface, where they find themselves surrounded by ancient ruins of Atlantis. In a solemn gesture to honor the 200 crew members who didn't survive, they light candles. After the chaos, the team regroups and continues the mission, assembling vehicles to move forward. Rourke declares that their survival now depends on Milo and his book. Guiding the team through tough terrain, Milo occasionally makes mistakes and leads them toward giant creatures, but quickly corrects course. What they don't know is that Atlantis' inhabitants are secretly watching them. At nightfall, the team sets up camp, and Cookie, the cook, prepares a feast for everyone. Milo eats alone, left out by the others, but Dr. Sweet eventually invites him to join the group. While sharing dinner, Milo flips through the Shepherd's Journal and notices a page is missing. Vinny, the explosives expert, tells him to stop working. Nobody's getting paid overtime. Milo admits he gets carried away, but insists the point is to discover and explore. However, the group makes it clear they're only in it for the money. After dinner, they sit around the campfire and share their stories. Dr. Sweet grew up in the Arapaho tribe. His father was a military doctor who stayed in Kansas after meeting his mother, a native woman. Audrey, the mechanic, shares that her father always wanted 2 boys, one for the shop and one to be a boxer, but ended up with 2 daughters who took on those roles. Now she's saving up to open another shop with her dad. Vinny tells how his family owned a flower shop until a gas leak in the house next door caused an explosion that blew him through a window. Sarcastically, he says he took it as a sign from the universe. When Milo asks about about Moliere's backstory, Dr. Sweet steps in to stop them from telling it. Eventually, everyone falls asleep, unaware that the Atlanteans are approaching silently. In the middle of the night, Milo wakes up to go to the bathroom, causing the natives to retreat into hiding. Suddenly, a swarm of glowing insects surrounds him. As he tries to shoo them away, he accidentally crushes one, triggering a chain reaction as they turn into fireballs that set the camp ablaze. The chaos wakes the entire expedition, and in a panic, they all rush toward their vehicles. They seem to escape, but while crossing a bridge, the firebugs latch onto the vehicles, causing them to explode and sending them plummeting into the depths of an inactive volcano. Fortunately, everyone survives. They regroup and search for a way out, but soon realize that Milo is missing. He had been knocked unconscious at the top. When he wakes up, he finds himself surrounded by Atlanteans, including Kita, now a beautiful young woman. Upon seeing his wound, Kita gently touches it and heals it with a magical light. The moment is interrupted when the expedition emerges from the volcano using the drilling vehicle. The Atlanteans immediately retreat, and Milo follows them until he discovers something incredible. A majestic city surrounded by endless waterfalls. Soon after, the rest of the group catches up with Milo and is left in awe of the legendary Atlantis. You might not know this, but the story in the film is based on a real myth, first recorded by Plato. The earliest reference to the lost city of Atlantis appears in Plato's dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC. However, the philosopher's intention wasn't to tell a mystery or adventure tale. For Plato, the story of Atlantis was a warning disguised as myth. He believed that luxury and the unchecked pursuit of power corrupted societies, making them less virtuous, and used Atlantis as an example of what happens to a civilization that gives in to greed. The myth describes a conflict between Atlantis and Athens. Ancient Athenians were portrayed as a pure and virtuous society, rejecting luxury, living austerely, and dedicated to military training without personal wealth. Atlantis, on the other hand, represented the exact opposite. According to the myth, in ancient times, the gods divided the world among themselves. Athena received the region of Athens, while Poseidon was given the island of Atlantis, a vast, beautiful place rich in resources with everything a civilization could need to thrive. On this island, Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman named Clito, and together they had 10 children. The eldest, Atlas, became the first king of Atlantis, while his brothers ruled other parts of the island. These 10 semi-divine kings started a dynasty, but over time, their divine lineage diluted. The first generation was half god, the second a quarter, and so on. As they became more human, they began to fall prey to what Plato saw as the corrupting nature of extreme luxury. Wealth and power led them to increasingly ambitious and imperialistic lifestyles, and eventually they sought to conquer the Mediterranean. They conquered nearly everything in their path, but when they tried to subjugate Athens, they were met with a strong and virtuous city that, despite lacking the same wealth or military power, managed to defeat them. For Plato, this was proof that true greatness wasn't found in opulence, but in discipline, austerity, and wisdom. As punishment for their arrogance and moral decay, the gods unleashed a cataclysm, earthquakes and floods that sank Atlantis in a single night. If we analyze the myth from this perspective, it's clear that Plato used the story of Atlantis as a mirror for his own society. He meant it as a warning that unchecked pursuit of wealth, power, and limitless resources only leads to corruption, decadence, and ultimately destruction. Interestingly, the film seems to carry a similar message, which I'll explain later. Now, did Atlantis really exist? I'll tell you at the end. The Atlanteans emerge and begin questioning the group in their own language, but Milo, using his linguistic talents, responds in Atlantean, impressing them. One of them removes their mask. It's Kita. Milo explains their situation, and Kita, understanding, welcomes them. She then takes them to meet her father, the king of Atlantis, who is not pleased by their arrival. He says he knows what they're looking for, and they won't find it. Rourke insists they're just explorers, but the king points out that they arrived armed and orders them to leave. Rourke explains that the weapons are only to remove potential obstacles and asks the king to allow them to stay one night to rest. The king reluctantly agrees. In private, the king tells Kita that he would have once eliminated intruders without hesitation. She replies that in the past their people were strong, but now they're in decline. If the visitors can uncover the secrets of the past, maybe they can save their future. Meanwhile, Commander Rourke and his team suspect the king is hiding something, so Rourke sends Milo to speak with Kita, since he can understand their language. Milo sets out to find Kita, but she finds him first. She says she has questions for him and asks him to come with her. Kita explains that, according to legend, Atlantis sank because the gods, jealous of its greatness, sent a cataclysm. She only remembers the sky going dark, people screaming and running, and then a bright light and a star floating above the city. Her mother entered the light, and she never saw her again. Milo, stunned, realizes Kita may be over 8,000 years years old. She confirms it. Then Milo tells her they found Atlantis thanks to the shepherd's journal. Kida is amazed that he can read Atlantean since that knowledge was lost when the city sank. Kida shows him the daily life of her people. Milo introduces her to his friends and they all enjoy a meal with the people of Atlantis. But that night, masked figures break into the expedition team's vehicle and steal some rifles. Meanwhile, Kida tells Milo that while her people are still alive, their culture is slowly fading. She compares it to a rock battered by waves wearing away over time. Then she invites Milo to swim in a lake to show him a mural covered in inscriptions and paintings, hoping he can decipher them. As he reads the mural, Milo realizes it tells the complete history of Atlantis and reveals that a crystal, like the one Kida wears around her neck, is the heart of the city. The brilliant light Kida remembers is the energy source that keeps her people alive. Kida asks where the heart of Atlantis is now, but Milo can't find the answer in his journal, which makes him suspect that the missing page might contain the key. When Milo exits the lake, he finds Commander Rourke waiting. Rourke shows him the missing page from the shepherd's journal, which depicts the heart of Atlantis. But Rourke isn't alone. He's surrounded by the rest of the crew. They've all betrayed Milo. Their mission was never about discovery. It was always to steal the heart of Atlantis. At that moment, Kida surfaces from the water and tries to attack, but 3 masked figures overpower her. They're mercenaries hired by Rourke. I really like Rourke as a villain because his evil feels realistic. He's not an over-the-top lunatic with a thirst for destruction. He's essentially a greedy businessman who's found in his mercenary work a path to get what he wants. He didn't rise to power by intimidating others or ruling through fear, but by being clever, methodical, and deceptive. From the beginning, Rourke almost never lost his composure. He always maintained a calm and confident demeanor, which made him difficult to read. That self-control is part of what makes him so dangerous. He's also calculated and cautious. Every one of his moves has been carefully planned to ensure he holds the upper hand. He didn't reveal his true intentions until it was absolutely necessary. Milo and the Atlanteans didn't suspect him because he presented himself as a reliable leader, someone who appeared to be on their side. His deception was so effective that when he finally revealed his plan, the shock was complete. This, combined with his clear lack of empathy, makes him a master manipulator. He didn't need to assert authority through violence at first because he knew how to play with people's minds, leading them exactly where he wanted without them realizing it, just like he did with Milo and the King of Atlantis. In fact, his interaction with the king is a great example of his skillful manipulation. When the king questioned their weapons and ordered them to leave, Rourke didn't respond with threats or violence. Instead, he carefully chose his words. The weapons are just for eliminating any obstacles that might arise. It's a phrase vague enough not to raise immediate alarms, but also clear enough to suggest that he's willing to use force if needed. He masked his threat behind words that sounded harmless, which allowed him to carry on with his plan. This tactic is reminiscent of many people in positions of power. Politicians, corporate leaders, and corrupt figures often use vague and ambiguous language to hide questionable actions. Rather than admitting mistakes or acknowledging controversial decisions, they use phrases that are designed to sound positive or harmless. Expressing themselves in this way allows them to manipulate those who trust them and make their actions seem more justified than they really are. The less clear the information, the easier it is to control the narrative. But there's one more trait, perhaps Rourke's most defining one, that I'll mention at the right moment because it's the one that ultimately leads to his downfall. Rourke tries to convince Milo to join them, but Milo refuses, saying he's not a mercenary. Rourke corrects him. He's not a mercenary. He's a capitalist adventurer. Milo tries to explain that the heart of Atlantis isn't just a giant diamond. It's the life source of the city. If they steal it, the Atlanteans will die. But rather than deter them, this information excites them even more, since it means they could sell it at an even higher price. Rourke argues that scholars never get their hands dirty, and that if museums returned all their stolen artifacts, they'd be empty. In his view, they're just providing a necessary service to archaeology. Then, with Kida as their prisoner, they confront the king and demand the location of the crystal. Rourke threatens and hits the king until he notices a strange stone in the palace courtyard that matches the symbol from the cover of the shepherd's journal. Rourke, Helga, Milo, and Kida approach the rock formation, which turns out to be the entrance to an underground chamber. Below, they find a lake surrounded by enormous floating masks and a massive glowing crystal at the center. Rourke tosses a stone into the lake. Immediately, the masks, which had been dormant, light up with an intense red glow. The crystal around Kida's neck begins to glow brightly, as if drawn by the mask's energy. Just like her mother before her, Kida is entranced by the light and begins to float toward it until she disappears. When she returns, she has strange new powers. Energy radiates from her and the giant masks fall into the lake. Seeing her now as a living treasure, Rourke and his team trap her inside a containment box. Furious, Milo tells them they're destroying an entire civilization just for money. Rourke mocks him, talks about natural selection, and before leaving, punches him in the face. But Dr. Sweet, Moliere, Packard, and other crew members change their minds and choose to stand with Milo. As Rourke, Helga, and their mercenaries flee, they destroy the bridge, the only exit from Atlantis. At this point, it becomes clear that the film is tackling a deep theme through Rourke's character. He embodies the imperialist mindset that has shaped much of world history. To Rourke, Atlantis is nothing more than a means to acquire wealth and power, regardless of the cost to its people. His attitude toward the Atlanteans is both dismissive and utilitarian. He shows no interest in their history, culture, or identity. He doesn't see them as human beings with rights and autonomy, but as mere obstacles in his path. He even quotes Darwin, using the idea of natural selection and the survival of the fittest to justify his actions. This dehumanizing mindset perfectly reflects how many colonizing powers have treated native populations, denying their humanity and justifying their exploitation with claims of racial or cultural superiority. Unfortunately, this mindset led to the destruction of countless cultures, the exploitation of indigenous peoples, the theft of land and knowledge, the use of forced labor, and the imposition of foreign values under the guise of progress are just a few of the consequences. And while this might seem like a relic of the past, the truth is that many nations still behave in imperialistic and exploitative ways. But now it's often through economic policies or foreign interventions. Dr. Sweet takes Milo to see the king, who, weak and dying, explains that Kida was chosen just like her mother before her. In times of danger, the crystal selects a member of the royal family to bond with in order to protect itself and its people. It draws energy from their ancestors and in return grants power, longevity, and protection, developing a consciousness of its own. The king admits that in his arrogance he once tried to use the crystal as a weapon of war, but its power was uncontrollable and led to destruction. That's why it was hidden beneath the city, to prevent the tragedy from happening again and to protect Kida from suffering the same fate as her mother. He warns Milo that if Kida stays bonded with the crystal for too long, she'll be lost forever. Before dying, he gives Milo his crystal pendant and asks him to save Atlantis and Kida. Though overwhelmed by the responsibility, Milo remembers his grandfather's words and chooses to take on the challenge. Using the crystal, he activates an ancient Atlantean aircraft, one that the locals had been unable to operate because they couldn't read the instructions. Milo teaches them that they only need their crystals to pilot the ships. With his friends, he sets out to rescue Kida. Meanwhile, Rourke is at the base of the volcano. He takes Kida and boards a hot air balloon to escape. But Milo and the team show up and an intense battle breaks out. Milo manages to make the balloon lose altitude, and in a moment of panic, Rourke throws Helga overboard to lighten the load. Enraged, Helga shoots the balloon, causing a huge explosion. Milo leaps onto the balloon and Rourke attacks him with an axe. In the struggle, Rourke breaks open the box containing Kida. Milo grabs a shard of crystal charged with energy and uses it to stab Rourke, who crystallizes and shatters into pieces. Without a doubt, the most defining trait of Rourke, and the one that ultimately led to his downfall, is his greed. He didn't just pursue his goals regardless of the consequences. He saw everything and everyone as tools to be used for his own benefit. He had no qualms about betraying, discarding, or eliminating anyone who got in his way. Greed, unlike ambition, is insatiable. An ambitious person seeks to reach a goal or improve their circumstances. A greedy one, on the other hand, has no real purpose beyond hoarding more and more, no matter who gets hurt along the way. Everyone on the team, except for Milo, joined the expedition for money. But while the others had personal reasons for doing so, Audrey wanted to open a shop with her father. Vinny had lost his family's flower shop. For Rourke, money had no meaning beyond the act of accumulating it. He never mentioned a personal reason, never spoke of a difficult past or a real need. For the others, money was a means to an end. For Rourke, it had no purpose other than to feed his insatiable greed. And here we can clearly see the connection between the message Plato wanted to convey and the one the movie puts forth. It's the same warning. At one point, the king of Atlantis admits that the arrogance of his people led to their downfall when they tried to use the crystal as a weapon of war, and Rourke clearly represents that message. A character driven by a colonialist and exploitative mindset, blinded by greed and obsessed with wealth, who ends up facing his own destruction. In fact, his death is deeply symbolic. He became the very object he wanted to sell. After treating others like things to be used, discarded, and forgotten, he himself became that. Objectified, shattered, and forgotten. If you only see people as things, sooner or later, you'll end up being treated like one yourself. Milo frees Kida and the two fall from the airship. But the danger isn't over. The volcano begins to erupt and the lava threatens to destroy Atlantis. Without hesitation, Milo takes Kida and leads his team to safety. They escape just in time and regroup at the palace. When Milo opens the containment box holding Kida, a bright blue light rises from the ground, connecting the city to a thread of mystical energy. Suddenly, the giant masks that had fallen into the lake rise back into place. But there's more. Kida's powers are unleashed, summoning giant stone guardians that form a glowing shield around Atlantis, protecting it from the eruption. The city is saved and Kida gently descends from the sky. Milo carries her in his arms as everyone celebrates the restoration of Atlantis. Another interesting way to view Milo's adventure is as a metaphor for a journey deep into the human mind. In many mythologies, the unconscious is symbolically represented by the ocean, since the sea evokes the unknown, the deep, and the uncontrollable, all qualities associated with the unconscious. Freud described the unconscious as a space where memories, desires, and traumas are stored, things the conscious mind may not want to face. Over time, experiences we can't process get buried under layers of rational thought, habits, and defense mechanisms. But those memories and emotions don't disappear. They remain there, quietly influencing our decisions and how we see the world. In the film, Atlantis lies buried beneath the sea, and its people have lost their language, and much of their knowledge has been forgotten. In a way, Milo's and the crew's descent into the ocean can be interpreted as a journey into what's been repressed, forgotten, or essential to the Atlanteans, a deep dive into their past, their buried memories, and their faded identity. And because Milo can read the Atlantean language, interpret their ancient symbols, and restore their meaning, he acts as a kind of psychoanalyst for the Atlanteans. It's through him that they begin to recover their memory, and with it, their identity. From a psychological perspective, this is similar to what happens in therapy. When someone starts to uncover forgotten fragments of their personal story and rebuild the narrative of who they really are. Finally, the reawakening of Atlantis, when the crystal is activated and their lost knowledge is restored, can be seen as the conclusion of a successful therapeutic process. It's like someone who, after a deep exploration of their unconscious, manages to integrate their memories, reconcile with their past, and find a new sense of purpose. The crew decides to return to the surface, and Kida gifts them valuable treasures in gratitude. They say their emotional goodbyes, but Milo, true to his adventurous spirit, chooses to stay behind. Before parting, the group takes a photo to remember their experience. Later, the team dressed in their finest gathers at Mr. Whitmore's mansion to tell him all about the adventure. As he looks through their photos, he finds a package from Milo, an Atlantean crystal pendant, and a picture with his grandfather along with a thank you note. Eventually, Milo and Kida get married. Together, they carve a stone mask in honor of Kida's father. Atlantis, now restored, remains hidden from the outside world, flourishing in its splendor. Now, the big question, was Atlantis real? While Plato had a habit of inventing civilizations as philosophical exercises, many later writers took the story of Atlantis literally. Over time, this led many people to believe in its existence and even search for its ruins in different parts of the world. However, there's no archaeological evidence to confirm its existence. All signs suggest that Atlantis, as Plato described it, was never a real place, but rather an allegory about the corruption and downfall of civilizations. But that doesn't mean its story has no value. Beyond being just a myth, the story of Atlantis remains relevant because it speaks to a pattern that has repeated itself throughout human history. Great empires that rise to power only to collapse under the weight of their own arrogance, corruption, and excess. From Rome to more modern civilizations, the lesson still holds true. In that sense, Atlantis isn't just a story about a city lost beneath the ocean, but a reflection on the fragility of societies and the danger of forgetting the values that sustain them. Maybe instead of looking for the ruins of Atlantis underwater, we should pay more attention to its message. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that civilizations may fall, but the warnings about their fall always remain floating in time.